Welcome to The Digital Footprint, a podcast for leaders in healthcare, public health, and education who are looking to leverage technology to solve problems and make a big impact. In each episode, we interview innovators and entrepreneurs who are solving the most challenging problems facing these industries. Join us as we dig into the colossal tasks involved in bringing a new digital product to life. Welcome to The Digital Footprint.
Hello, and welcome to The Digital Footprint, presented by Tyrannosaurus Tech. We are an award-winning technology partner dedicated to helping you create high-impact software products. I'm your host, Richard Sims. Today's two-part episode is a special one for us. We're celebrating 7 years of Tyrannosaurus Tech, which is wild. And we're going to think through all the hard work that's gone into building a software development firm from nothing, when it was just me and Carlos trying to cobble it together, into a great team, a multi-million-dollar business that it is today. And we're just going to talk about all the lessons that we've learned along the way, which there are plenty, so that you can learn from our mistakes and go further and faster than we ever did. And joining me for this special occasion, of course, is my co-founder and co-host, Carlos Gonzalez. Carlos, glad to have you on, man.
Hey, Richard. It's great to be back.
So before we go any further, we definitely need to say thank you, to our audience, our community, for your support all these years. Whether you've tuned into The Digital Footprint, worked with us as a client, trusted us with your technology, we would definitely not be here without you.
Absolutely, Richard. I want to add how much gratitude I have for our clients and for our team, past and present. Surviving for 7 years as a small business is an accomplishment for sure. It takes a village.
For sure. We've had a lot of people that have put up with a lot. Our families, for sure, and folks on the team. So someone
Definitely
was being very patient with us along the way. So it's a big deal, this 7-year milestone to us, for sure. And I think back, small businesses have such a small success rate, frankly. And I think only 9% actually make it to $1 million or more in revenue. So, I'm incredibly proud of how far we've come. And hopefully this is a good opportunity to celebrate that a bit, but then also talk about these lessons, which I think is what we really want to focus on. What's the best advice we can provide, tips, things we've learned the hard way. So I'm looking forward to jumping in. Okay, let's jump into lesson 1. Be militant about cash flow. Cash flow is king. It is very true. And really, I think the main reason small businesses fail is cash flow issues. I wish I remember who said this to me, but it's something like, more companies suffocate than crash and burn, which I think is really true. Just mismatch between spend and accounts receivables. And what really surprises me is a lot of times the fundamentals of the business are actually sound, but they run out of money. So they're cut off at the knees before they can make it. And it could have been us. And as we grew, I think the funny thing is these problems became more exaggerated as we started bringing in more money, bigger contracts. And part of that is you start getting paid on net 90. And I can just remember suddenly realizing, wow, we're doing really well on paper, but look at all the expenses we're paying. And all these folks, wait, they're not paying us for 3 months? Wait a second, that doesn't quite add up. So it can sneak up on you pretty quickly, for sure.
Yeah, that's right, Richard. And the thing about being militant about your cash flow is that it can look very different depending on the stage that you're in. Like in the beginning, for example, we knew that was really important. And for that reason, we would structure our agreements in such a way that we would get half up front. And that was perfectly okay at that time and size of contract. But as we grew, as we started working with bigger clients, and started to notice that maybe it was a little bit ridiculous to start asking for half up front, we shifted our practices there. At the same time, with bigger clients, those net 90s or even net 30s are things that if you haven't planned out in your runway, can really get you in trouble. And something that I know that we've been always very conservative and good about is also keeping a good amount of runway in our business account and not going crazy with partner distributions. I would say, I think 3 to 6 months is the rule that we've always followed, and it has served us really well so far. I think that as you grow, it's also important to look at potentially getting a business line of credit so that you have that additional, rainy day fund in there in case you need to tap into it. But yeah, throughout the years, definitely what this means for us has evolved, and it's been very exciting and at times thrilling. And,
Well, I remember when we would get paid half up front. Those were the good old days in a sense. And also I feel like then it's like we needed to be paid half up front too. So we were like, no, we need the money to do this. And I think it's good. I mean, it's come from us being more confident and just more established, obviously. But yeah, now a lot of times it's more like, hey, we just need like a couple of sprints up front so that we know this is for real, but then we know that we're going to prove ourselves and things will keep rolling. So in some ways I miss the old days, but it was also because we were scared and needed it. So let's talk about the 3 main tips that we had, based on this whole cash flow and being really tuned in. One is never assume anyone will pay on time, right? We know that people will not pay on time. Some will, they're angels, but most people will not. And of course, some people might not pay you at all. So you never can assume that everyone is going to pay you. You've got to base, your forecasts and stuff on that assumption. And you always have to assume that projects will take twice as long, cost twice as much as expected. That's tip number 2. Things are typically more involved than you think. So you got to plan accordingly, especially in software development world. And point 3 is just make sure you really understand your margins, your overhead, the revenue required to become stable. As a business grows, you're seeing bigger numbers. It's really exciting. It's validating. But we know that if a project is $100,000, but you spend $96,000 to get it done, it might not have been really actually a good use of your team's time. So that's the challenge. Yeah. So keep that stuff in mind, I think, everyone, for sure. Okay. So speaking of building a stable business, let's move on to lesson number 2. Good owners operate, great owners delegate. So yeah, if your goal is to create a, multi-million-dollar company, you have to learn to delegate. And I will say, Carlos, you're much better at this than I am. You're being nice, but I'm sure in your mind, you're like, yeah, dude, you still need to delegate more. It's true. But yeah, I think when you have a young business, hustling out of necessity is one thing. Like you got to do a bunch of the grunt work. But I think that part of your duty as a founder is to outgrow that stuff as soon as it makes sense. And it is very easy to underestimate that necessity. Founders get absorbed in performing basic tasks. I know I'm one of those people that if I feel busy, I feel like I'm productive. But if I take a step back, a lot of times, of course, the things I'm doing, is this really the best use of my time? The answer is probably no. So you have to ask those tough questions. I mean, I know it's tempting to kind of hold on because you don't want to lose control or you get paranoid about others not doing it correctly, but that can very much hold you back. One example that comes to mind for me is just one particular vacation I took with my family down to the beach, which, hey, we got to go to the beach. It was wonderful. I shouldn't complain, but I felt that I had to work on this proposal and get it out while I was down there. And, it just had me half in, half out, getting the kids to bed and then trying to get back online to work on this proposal, very small condo. Everyone's frustrated with me. And of course, we didn't win the business either. So I feel like after that, I was like, I'm done. I'm not doing this. I need true vacations where I come back feeling rested, where the family's not frustrated with me. And yeah, it just wasn't worth it. And then of course I realized if I can't go away for a week without feeling like I have to get back online, that's a problem at that stage because we were several years in, right? So no more for me. Got to really, really check out. and learn to delegate for sure.
Well, Richard, I think you're being too kind. The delegating muscle is something that I've had to, put a ton of practice into. So, I mean, there's a few things that, we've learned along the process. One thing is that as founders, we might do our work in very specific ways. And the way we do it is not always the most delegatable. So it's really important to ensure that as you're looking to delegate a process, you think about the systems and the process and who is the right person to delegate something to before you can delegate it. Also, finding the right person can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'm a big believer of working with smarter person than you are and really letting them help you bring that together more so than forcing somebody to do the wrong thing, the thing that really doesn't align with their skill set or their experience.
Okay, so while we're on the topic, let's move to lesson number 3. Don't hire until it hurts. So we've talked about being hesitant to delegate. I think on the other end of the spectrum are founders who are too eager to hire. Sometimes they just really want to get out of the weeds and not do kind of the tedious, busy work, so they're pushing to hire too quickly. Sometimes I think founders have their ego wrapped up in headcount, so they just want to build out the team even though it's premature. I know that we got burned by this one time for sure with an engineer we brought on full time, and this person interviewed well. They nailed the technical interview. They seemed like they'd be great to work with. I thought we were thorough, but it was pretty quick, I suppose. And it was crazy because like 2 weeks in to them being on board, all these red flags started to surface. And it was mostly how they were communicating with others on the team, like being very condescending to more junior engineers or like being super rigid in their opinions. And I just remember we were like, whoa, like where did this come from? And this clearly is not a cultural fit. And it's so painful and expensive, frankly, to undo that. So I wish we had slowed down with him and gotten to know him a little bit better before we pulled the trigger in that instance for sure.
For sure, Richard. Because of those mistakes, we've implemented 5 non-negotiable rules for hiring. Number 1, try before you buy. Before you commit to hiring somebody full-time, have them contract for you. 3 months, it's really plenty time for them to see if you are a good fit for them as a company or for you to see if they are a good fit for your team. Maintaining a healthy ratio of employees to contractors is our number 2. It's really important that whenever you get a project, you don't immediately jump to hiring somebody, and instead try to hire contractors who can help you deliver that project. And once you see that that client is becoming a more serious client, maybe then you hire. Number 3, leverage experienced contractors when possible. We've seen it time and time again where when you hire the wrong person for the job, you will not get the results you're looking for. It's really important that the people that you're hiring are the right people for the job.
Yeah, and I think what I would want to call out on this one is there's like a balance. I think we always, frankly, are wanting really high quality contractors that we can count on. A lot of times we're paying a premium, but we know they are going to crush it, right? And again, their rate might be a lot more, but if they get it done in 1 hour and someone else who's less expensive, but it takes them 4 hours, you end up paying more. Now, I also would balance that with there's, of course, a good time and a place to work with more junior level folks. I think that is something we've done really well, but just understanding where they're at, what's realistic, and kind of the upside, frankly, of helping them grow into a more experienced engineer. But I think where people make a big mistake, again, is trying to go for a low rate, thinking they'll get the same result. And again, for us, like the low rate's great, but we know what we're going to get from you. And we want to work with you to get you to where, you're delivering at this higher rate. So it's both. But when you really need the job done efficiently, yeah, I think you're you're better off kind of going for really experienced folks.
For sure. And piggybacking on that, number 4, make sure they are domain experts and not generalists.
One thing I know we have been a little bit cynical about is full stack developers. Because, yeah, that's become such a common term. And I think there are full stack developers, but usually they can claim that because they've been at it for years and years and years and just have learned all aspects of the stack the hard way. I see a lot of junior level folks that want to claim that, but I know for us, we want you to be more specialized for sure.
100%. And number 5, only hire against client commitments. And this is one that we really, really take to heart. We really don't mind having even more contractors than we do full-timers. Because once we hire our full-time person, we want to make sure we can give him stability. And that stability comes from those big client commitments. If you hire somebody before you have a longer term commitment with a client, you're really taking a risk, because once that project wraps up, you may not have where to place those folks. And that's not good. Lesson number 4, structure your services for long-term customer value. Contrary to what you've heard from the tech industry, SaaS is definitely not the only way to build a profitable business in tech. You can build a profitable and scalable service-based businesses, and we are living proof of that. How you structure your deals, offers, and the clients you're pursuing will definitely play a part in you creating a long-term relationship. If you only work with startups who typically would have finite budgets and are trying to get a particular set of features out to test them with their potential customers, it's really hard to build a long-term relationship there. So a lot of times it's really important for you to also look for more established businesses that will have longer term needs from your team. And I'm not referring to the Coca-Colas of the world necessarily. There's plenty of small businesses that set aside yearly budgets to develop their product, that understand that software is never done. And so those are great companies for you to build your business around. Richard, what else you got?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of thoughts here. I mean, one, I love SaaS businesses and they get a lot of credit that is owed, but I do think just the narrative of what you see in tech media and stuff is like, you've got to be on this 600% year over year growth rocket ship. And I do think, services-based businesses can be super fun, super fast-paced, super rewarding, very lucrative. So I am very much in that camp. And yeah, you're 100% right. Like, we love working with folks who are entrepreneurial and pursuing something new, and we get to do some of that startup work, but you can't base a business like this fully around startups. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work because you do need that long-term business that keeps coming in. And I know that for businesses like ours, I think a lot of times the fundamental flaw is they're doing these kind of one and done projects. They're super heads down on the work. And then when it's over, new business development or what's coming next is kind of an afterthought. So it's very much this feast or famine cycle. They're either like overwhelmed with work or desperately looking for what's next. And you have to break out of that dynamic. You got to really find ways to create long-term relationships within your existing services, to really make it work, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would say we're very well networked in the Atlanta sphere of services-based business. And we've seen it over the years how you have founders who are maybe a little bit more on the technical side of the spectrum, and they tend to look for projects. Once they find them, go into heads down mode to wrap up that project. And in the end, they end up having to go back out and look for more business. And that is something that we've catched really early on and have made a point to ensure that as we're working through a project with a client, we're also looking for ways to add value in a long-term capacity.
For sure. So, I mean, a couple examples of that obviously are, okay, we're going to build this app for you, but what comes next? Do you understand, the long-term requirements for supporting this and enhancing it over time? And, or if we were helping a client incorporate some AI tooling into their workflows, AI is changing all the time. There's new tools coming out, or ChatGPT is coming out with a new version, whatever it is, every couple of months. You're going to need to keep us engaged to optimize this and make sure you're using the latest and greatest. And I know from our experience, if you can lock in those longer term relationships, there's dependable revenue. You're not stressed every month about how you're going to make payroll. You provide much better service too. So it is a win-win for us, for the clients. When we're talking about this, I have one story burned into my memory from early days where we built an app for someone. We busted our rear ends. We did it on a shoestring budget. So it was early on. We desperately wanted to make it work, and we did. But what we really failed to do was educate these folks on the ongoing support needs. And again, set the stage that it was going to be a long-term relationship, that there were going to be ongoing needs and costs. And in this instance, after, in my opinion, we had knocked it out of the park, something changed with the terms in the Apple App Store, which happens, right? And I remember we had to do some tweaks to the app to keep it live in the App Store. And I remember over the phone, this woman cursing me out like we were trying to take advantage or squeeze money out of them. And I was like, ma'am, I mean, this is completely beyond our control. Like, call Tim Cook about this. If you want your app to stay in the store, we got to make these changes. And that's what we do. We have to be compensated. And again, that was the lesson learned, that part of this conversation is you got to educate folks on appropriate expectations, just so you're laying the groundwork for that ongoing work. Speaking of clients, not all clients are created equal. In our next episode, we're going to move on to lesson number 5. Always choose your team over clients. Maybe a risky opinion, since a lot of folks think the customer's always right. But I will say one thing that has really been proven true for us is choose your team over the client every time. This has been a great conversation already, and for us, a celebration. Thank you for tuning into our first episode of this special 2-part series on the 7 lessons we've learned from building a multi-million-dollar software development firm. Thanks so much to you, our audience, for tuning in and for your support over the last 7 years. We would not be here without you, and we want to hear from you. Your thoughts, do you agree, disagree with any of the lessons above? Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. I am Richard Sims, that's SIMMS.
And I am at Carlos L. Gonzalez. Thank you again for joining us on The Digital Footprint. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. And of course, if you need help with your next big tech project, shoot us a message on tyrannosaurustech.com and we will be in touch. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Digital Footprint. This show is brought to you by Tyrannosaurus Tech, an award-winning technology partner dedicated to designing and developing high-impact software products. If you like what you heard in this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For show notes and access to all episodes, please visit tyrannosaurustech.com/blog. Digital Footprint.